Hi, welcome to Tuesdays with Tara. I'm Tara Bundance, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about suffering. Not suffering more, but finding ways to support ourselves out of suffering. When you think about suffering, what comes to mind? Does major suffering come to mind, like when you're destitute and in bed because something horrible has happened, or you've been in a terrible accident, or had a terrible loss? Or do you consider suffering being some of the small things that happen in our lives? Things like constant anxiety, things like constant depression, just things that make us feel bad for a long time consistently. So I look at suffering as anything that causes us to feel bad for any period of time beyond what most might consider a healthy length of time. So if something bad happens that is pretty average, you've had a bad day and you're really struggling with what happened and you can't figure out what it was about, usually we can get through something like that within a couple of hours. And especially if we know how to reach out for support, we can probably talk through it and feel like, okay, I was able to get that out of my system and this person is supporting me. So all is well. And we move on. But then there's some people who something like that might happen to, and they may talk about it and then feel like the other person didn't support them, or they felt stuck in the way that they were processing about that what happened. And then maybe something happens the next day that's similar, and they tie those 2 days together and they think, this again, and maybe try to talk about it again with somebody that they feel like isn't listening to them or empathizing with them, and something might happen again the next day. Now something like that I would consider long-term suffering. Basically, it's when we get into a loop around something and we can't get out of it. To me, that's what suffering is. So when you find yourself in a place of really struggling to the point of calling it suffering, what is it that you tend to do to get yourself out of it? Is there a tool that you use? Are there practices that you have? Do you get online? Do you look for support? Do you do some meditations? Do you do some EFT or some breathing or a focus wheel or something to break the pattern around this thing that's been affecting you in a negative way? Now, one of the thoughts that came up for me this week is, in thinking about suffering, how do I handle it? What do I do about it? Often I reach out for help. I seek things out online, or I reach out to a friend, or I talk to my partner, or I talk to one of my parents, or something, or I might talk to a therapist, or I might do an EFT session or my focus wheel or meditation, breathing, take a bath. So I have many ways to take care of myself when I'm feeling really stuck around something. The problem is, the hardest part about suffering is recognizing that it's happening. So often we'll get into these patterns of life and just not even realize how negative we feel until we might catch ourselves saying something a number of times over and over again. Or you say something enough times to somebody and they point it out and they go, you said this to me last week and it sounds like you may be still working through the same problem. Now, we could use that as a message. We could use that like as a little ding insight to say, hey, do you notice the way you're talking about this? Do you notice that you're still talking about the same thing a week later? Or that you're still working through the same kind of energy, even if it's not the same issue, it's kind of the same energy building on top of itself, right? So when we catch ourselves in the suffering, that's the first step. Often we don't know how to catch ourselves. And so we might be really struggling and somebody could point it out to us and we might say, I don't know what you're talking about. Now we could say that and we could ignore it, or we could take that in and think, wow, this person does usually really care about me. So obviously they're not sharing this to be mean. And, there's so many different ways for us to catch when we're struggling. So, what I'm going to talk about today is a lot about how we catch ourselves in the struggle and what we do about it once we do catch ourselves in the struggle or in the suffering. So, when we are suffering or struggling, the only way we're going to get help from someone is to let someone know what we need. Now, we can't get there if we're in the depths of it. Usually, we have to stop ourselves and take some deep breaths, take a break, pull ourselves back. But what ends up happening so often is when we're caught in the struggle or caught in the suffering, we don't know how to catch ourselves and we keep trying to push through. As we push through, all we're doing is piling more stuff on ourselves. And by pushing through, we're just going to keep trudging slower and slower until something stops us and says, you can't do this anymore. We might get sick, we might get hurt, and we have to stop. We don't have a choice. And sometimes if you're not willing to do your own process and your own work and recognize like, this is something I need to work on, then you could keep repeating the same pattern over and over again for years and years and years. So once we catch ourselves in the struggle or the suffering, we have to decide, what do I need? I most often will say things like, I need this to stop. I need these things to stop happening, or I need these people to stop talking this way or acting this way or treating me this way. The problem is we're the common denominator. So if I'm the common denominator in all these situations that are creating this pattern of suffering and struggling for myself, then I'm the one that needs to shift, not try to shift everything out there, right? So if I'm in the struggle, I'm in the suffering, I need to ask for help. I have to have a community or an energy or something around me that I can reach out to. So if it's not my partner, because often it's not the healthiest thing if you're struggling or suffering and maybe it involves your partner. You don't go to your partner and say, hey, I need this to stop. We need to figure this out. Sometimes you can, but often you can't because your partner might be struggling or suffering as well. And so you can go to your partner and say, hey, I feel like something's going on. We need to work on this together. And if both of you aren't on the same page of being ready to do the work together to move through it, then you each have to have someone else to talk to. So it could be a best friend. It could be a therapist. It could be a counselor. It could be a support person. It could be a prayer friend. It could be someone, a group, a community that you trust and that they have your back and you have their backs whenever they're going through their own stuff. But we have to know that if I'm suffering or struggling, I got to call a friend and say, I'm struggling, I need help. Sometimes we don't know exactly how we need help, but often it's great if we can go to that person that we trust and say, I need help, can you help me? And they talk us through it. Other times we need to call our friend and say, I need help, and here's exactly what I need. So our friends can sometimes help us, especially if we build up enough of a rapport with that person that they're like, oh, I recognize this pattern in you. Here's what I'm seeing. And that's very helpful. So I had this amazing image come to me recently when I was sharing this concept with someone. And as I was talking to this person, this image just flew into my thoughts. And I'm sure other people have said this or heard this before, but it was so brand new to me. It was great. I wanted to share it with you all. Imagine a fish, a large fish, swimming in a river, and it comes around a corner and somehow it flops itself out onto land, floundering around on land, trying to find the water. Okay. Now imagine this fish flopping around, not knowing how to get to the water, and all it does is flop around because it's stuck. It's struggling. It can't breathe, right? So it's flopping around, and as it continues flopping around, it's slowly dying. And as it's dying, it slows down and it stops moving. Now imagine someone sees this fish flopping around on land and goes over and scoops it up and throws it back in the water. Fish swims away. Imagine that nobody sees the fish. Fish dies. We are the fish. When we are struggling, we are the fish out of water because we're not in the normal flow of the source energy that we move in all the time and that flows through us all the time. We're not swimming in source. When we're out and floundering, suffering, struggling, and not asking for help, it can slow us down to the point where we could maybe not necessarily die, but it feels like we're dying. We might start having panic attacks. And as that continues and builds and grows, it slowly puts pressure on our bodies, on our nervous system, on our hearts, on our brains, on our bellies and our guts. Food stops being processed as easily. In our joints, we hold our muscles tighter, so we hurt and we ache more no matter what we do, how we eat. Nothing changes, nothing gets fixed. And yet we're still trying to figure it out for ourselves. This fish out of water is going to flop around until it might accidentally somehow flop itself back into the water, but more than likely it's not going to do that. So it keeps flopping around thinking it has the answer. This is what we do. We think we have the answer, but the problem is we're floundering, we're flopping, and we're losing life. We're losing breath. We're holding our breath. We're aching, we're hurting, our hearts hurt, our nervous system hurts. All the things that we do to take care of ourselves isn't working. So we have to ask for help. We need an assist back into the flow of source, right? So when we feel ourselves in that place of suffering and struggling, and we're trying to figure it out on our own and it's not working and nothing's coming together for us, we have to ask for help. So a lot of times people don't know who to reach out to. A lot of times people don't have someone to ask for help, and they might not have money for a therapist. So there's free sources of support. So let's say someone's suffering in addiction, and it could be any kind of addiction, drugs, alcohol, sex, gambling, porn, anything. It could be anything that is causing this person's life to not work well, and things are falling apart and they're suffering. So there's obviously 12-step programs. There's obviously groups and communities of people that can support this person when they're willing to find that support. Same goes for codependency and emotional struggle around people. And they're not addicted to an outside physical thing like drugs, alcohol, sex, porn, one of those things, but they might be addicted to people and that connection they have to have all the time. And they make that person the God of their understanding, right? And so there's 12-step programs for that. There's CODA, there's Al-Anon, there's adult children of alcoholics. There's all kinds of groups and communities out there. There's trauma communities that you can find. So there's always sources. There's always a resource. The problem is sometimes we don't know how to find that resource because we might not feel like we deserve it. So when we're struggling and we feel like we either don't deserve help or that nobody cares about us, then we're going to stay in that suffering and we're going to flounder around until we die. So if you want to change that pattern, you have to ask for help. And I'm saying this not just because of experiences that I've had with clients or things that I've witnessed in other people. I'm saying this because this is what I've had to do too. We have to find a way to ask for help. So I'm an expert at asking for help, which is why this is something that I want to share with others free here on YouTube, because everybody's seeking help. Everybody's seeking guidance. Everybody's seeking some form of support on some level or another throughout our lives. Maybe not all the time, But there are times, like if you wanted to go learn how to play basketball, you're going to have to get coached. So that's support. You're going to be on a team, so you're going to be working with team members. That's support. You know, it goes everywhere. You want to get a better job, you might need to hire a business coach to coach you as support. You need therapy, you go reach out to a counselor or a therapist or a spiritual leader to support you. So support is out there. We just got to know that we're worth it and that we deserve to have the help. So here's a question that I often ask my clients. If someone came to you and asked for help, would you turn them away? And of course, a lot of times we can say it depends on the person, right? Or it depends on the circumstance or the situation. And so there's times where we have to say no, and that's okay because that's taking care of ourselves. But most of the time, if somebody that you care about and love dearly is struggling and just needs support, and they call you and they say, I really just need someone to talk to, 9 times out of 10, you're probably going to stop and either schedule a time to talk to that person or just start talking to them in that moment because we care. And so if we care and we want to be available to others, doesn't it make sense that others want to do the same for us? And so this is something I'm just putting out there to consider. Consider the possibility that people want to offer support and help, and that there are people who care about us, or there are groups and communities that are built around that kind of support that's available to us. So another aspect of support is knowing that sometimes people aren't available for the exact thing that we need. And the thing is, we can only be available for what we're capable of being available for, right? And when, say, for example, you break your leg, okay? You break your leg, you're not near your phone, and you yell out for help. Someone comes to your aid. Could be someone who cares about you and knows you and loves you, or it could be a stranger. This person walks up and you say, I broke my leg, I need help. And most of the time we're in so much suffering in that moment, physically, mentally, emotionally, it hurts, that we don't know how to tell somebody what to say. So if somebody comes to you, to your side, and you say, I need help, and this person says, I can call someone for you, it's okay to ask that person, would you be willing to stay with me until someone else shows up? That's something you can ask for. That person might not be able to offer that. It might be too stressful for them. It might be a trigger for them. It might be something that causes them their own suffering, emotionally or mentally. And so they might say, no, but I'll grab somebody who will. That person is assisting you. That person is helping you. That person showed up, for one thing, and that person may not be able to set your leg. They may not be able to take you to the hospital. They may not be able to call an ambulance. But if that person can sit with you and hold your hand until something else happens that can help you get to the hospital and get that leg set, then that person is assisting you. Now, if that person says, I can't help you by taking you anywhere, but I can call someone for you, and you think to yourself, great, this is just one more situation where people aren't available for me. There's just one more time that nobody cares about me. Then that's what you're going to log into your head. And this person didn't help you. They actually caused more suffering. So we have to change the way we see support and help in our lives. So something else that came up in this conversation that I was having with this client is how we put ourselves in enough of a humbling or humility space that we know how to ask for help. Sometimes we don't know who to call. Sometimes we don't know who to reach out to. So we have to get on our knees. Now, in some churches, that's a way to pray to God. In some 12-step programs, that's a way to humble yourself. In other words, humble yourself to source, to God, to spirit, to whatever you might know out there as something that's available to offer support. When we get on our knees, proverbially or literally, we are humbling ourselves to the point where we're saying, I can't do this on my own. I need help. So when we can do that, when we can put ourselves literally or figuratively on our knees to say, universe, source, God, spirit, angels, guides, anyone, I need help. I don't know what to do anymore. Help shows up. I'm going to say that when you are willing to put yourself in that much of a humble space, spirit knows, source knows, God knows. And when that comes to life through you, help me. I need help. I'm on my knees. I'm suffering and I can't do anything else. Somehow, it may not happen just like that. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it shows up in the sign, something landing in front of you, whether it's a feather or a message that falls out of a book, or falls off the wall and lands at your feet. Sometimes it comes in the way of a book that someone hands you that you're just like, disregard it, throw it, wherever. But when you've asked for help, be open to the possibility that it's going to show up in the most kind of interesting, fascinating, who knows how kind of ways. Could show up as a person, could show up as a class, could show up as a book, could show up as a message, could show up as, clarity in your dreams. It could show up in thousands, millions, billions of ways that we can't imagine, because the reason we can't imagine it is that's what we were waiting for. The reason that we can't figure it out on our own is because we've been trying. Nothing's working. Something new has to happen. Something kind of shocking in a way has to happen. Someone just knocks on your door and you open the door and it's who knows who standing in front of you. You may know them, you may not know them. And they have something to say to you. It may come off as a song that you're listening to on the radio. I've had it happen where I've said, source, God, goddess, universe, I am so lost. I'm so completely stuck. I need help. Boom, next song on the radio comes on, and it's literally the answer that I was looking for. I've had things happen so many different ways that has shocked me, like rocked me to my core, that's why I'm a good asker for help, because I've seen it happen time and time and time and time and time and time again. It happens all the time. Now you've got to be open. You've got to be willing. You've got to be willing to accept that it might not look like you think it's going to look. It may not look like the perfect answer. It may not look like somebody sweeping in and fixing your problem for you. It may come in so many different forms, but we've got to be open to looking. We've got to be willing to see when it does show up. Okay, so to summarize, when we are in suffering, we're stuck. There are numerous ways that we can get unstuck, and it's not about trying to fix it, change it, know the answer. It could come in the way of humbling ourselves to source, God, goddess, all that is, by getting on our knees. It could be looking to others for support, finding a group, some therapy, a counselor, reaching out online, going online and finding videos. It could be reaching out to a specific person, asking for help or guidance or support or reflection or something, just asking. Imagine the fish out of water, floundering around, not knowing how to get back into the water of source. Remember yourself as when you're struggling and suffering and trying to fix the problem and it's not working and nothing's falling into place. It's important to ask for help. And then remembering that when we ask for help, sometimes it doesn't show up the way we think it should. And that's us needing to get out of our heads. So we've got to get out of our own way, allow the kind of support that does decide to show up, and accept it for what it is. Be grateful. We've got to learn to be more grateful for the little tiny messages that come from Spirit, Source, God. And when they do, go deeper, ask for more help, get on your knees, say thank you to those who show up, even when it's not what you expected or wanted, because it's God saying, Source saying, I've got you. I see you. I hear you. I'm here. And it can open up little places in our brains that trauma has held in place, maybe break some of those places loose to help us understand and recognize that we're worth it. We deserve it, just like anybody else is worth it and deserves it. So you're worth it. I'm worth it. We're all worth it. We all deserve support. It's up to us as individuals, because nobody else is going to know how best to help you other than yourself. And if you don't know what to ask for, just say, I need support. I need some love. I need you to hold my hand. Can you help me find a therapist? Any of the things that, or just say, I'm suffering, I'm struggling, I don't know what to do. Just being able to reach out, just being able to find support, because it's there. Trust that. Trust that. Believe in the guidance that you have surrounding you always. Be blessed. Have a wonderful week. And I'll see you next week on Tuesdays with Tara.